On this episode of Urban U, Ghoulish, Garish, and Gorgeous, the story behind City College's iconic Gothic gargoyle sculptures, a statue graveyard that's over 100 years old. Ready to level up your knowledge in digital game design? Join us as we share more about CUNY's new state-of-the-art bachelor degree program, Gaming Pathways. We also introduce you to a CUNY trailblazer who became the first woman and the first Latina to be appointed Bronx County Clerk. That and more, welcome to Urban U.
We don't often have reason to film from a basement on our show. But then again, not every basement is filled with 100-year-old sculptures.
They're called grotesques. Many people will call them gargoyles, but in medieval architecture, a gargoyle is a sculpture which also functions as a drain spout. A grotesque is any type of ornamental sculpture in Gothic architecture. There's a great variety of figures. We have animals, of rams and lions and dragons and many different creatures, as well as these human figures.
Rams and lions and dragons, oh my. What you are looking at is, for all intents and purposes, a statue graveyard. Deep in the underground basement tunnels underneath City College lay these weathered grotesques, not gargoyles. Sydney Van Noort is the head archivist and special collections librarian at the City College of New York, who explained to us the history of these statues, over a century old.
Particularly in the 19th century, throughout the United States, various academic institutions build buildings in imitation of the university buildings of England in particular. It's what's called collegiate Gothic. And here the George Post structures are referred to as Tudor Gothic, or in some cases, English perpendicular Gothic. The idea is that that the American institutions have the same kind of visual authority as did the universities of England and other places in Europe.
The George Post Van Noort mentions was the architect of City College's campus at the turn of the 20th century. And while it was a little-known Livingston Smith and G. Grandellis from Post Office who specifically created the grotesques, Post himself certainly takes the lion's share of the historical spotlight. Some of his best-known works you can still see today, including the former New York Times building, now owned by Pace University, the New York Stock Exchange, and of course, City College.
Many years ago, students were able to use these tunnels to change classes to access from one building to another. But these tunnels have not been open to students since at least 1969.
These days, there's only one night a year when the tunnels are open for visitors, for Halloween. But beyond that, for decades, these halls have been accessible only to facilities staff and to our ghoulish granite golems.
So these sculptures were not placed here in the tunnel. They were decorating the buildings. These are the original terracotta decorative sculptures of the buildings designed by George Brown Post. The buildings were granite stone with terracotta contrasting ornamentation. The figures are meant to reflect what types of classes or activities happen inside each respective building. For the engineering technology building, which is Compton, they are making things. For Baskerville Hall, which was the original chemistry building, they're working with flasks and tubes and such. For Wingate Hall, which is the gymnasium building, they're holding barbells and other athletic equipment.
However, these original grotesques from Post's team aren't the statues you see on top of City College's buildings today.
So in the 1980s, it was noticed that these terracotta sculptures were being damaged in the weather and pieces were falling off. They were becoming a hazard. So they had to be removed from the buildings, and molds were taken from the originals and recast replacements have been placed back on the buildings.
There are hundreds and hundreds of grotesques perched on City College's buildings, but not all of the originals are down here in the tunnels. Many are outside and easily accessible to the public on campus, fittingly laid to rest next to the School of Architecture.
But some of the ones here are here to be indoors and protected because they are of particular interest. We've got the figure with the Egyptian temple gate. We have the figure with the classical facade with the columns, and we have this little figure here who's holding a model of Shepherd Hall. In a way, they're special. They've been chosen to be in this space.
From the basements of City College, and from all our statue friends here, I'm Ari Goldberg for Urban U.
The Gaming Pathways program is an important boundary that needs to be broken because these days kids are like, Mom, I want to do games. And they're like, no, that's not a future. But now, given that, there's a future for them to learn and actually make a career and do something what you love.
Considering that gaming jobs in New York City accounted for over $2 billion in economic growth in 2020 alone, it's safe to say that the gaming industry is booming right now. And City College is delving right into the fray through the creation of the Gaming Pathways program, which gives students the tools needed to get a BA in digital game design and make their mark in the industry. And if anyone would know all about the history behind this special initiative, it would be the director of the program himself, Nicholas Fortugno.
About a year and a half ago, because of the work of a CUNY administrator and professor named Dr. Stan Altman and the Dean of Science here, Dr. Susan Perkins, who used to be at the Museum of Natural History and is very interested in games, started to pursue a relationship with the city around using games as a way to think about not just STEM education specifically, right? But thinking about it in the broad sense of all the skills that come under games. And that students were interested in games, right? They were playing games. They saw games as an outlet for them to socialize, for them to be creative. And that led the Adams administration through the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment to want to create programs that would use games as a way to promote students not just getting into college, but getting jobs in the games industry, which is a growing industry in New York. And that led to the creation of Gaming Pathways.
And through this program, students are introduced to the fundamentals needed to pave their way in the industry.
The curriculum that we are building at City College is not really that substantively different than the curricula you see in other games universities. At the beginning of the program, you study the three main disciplines that are involved in digital game development, which is game programming, right, like the actual coding of games, digital art, which is creating the visual assets in games from characters to 3D models to interfaces, and then game design, right, which is the study of games themselves. How do people make choices? How do you make challenge interesting? What is fun and how do you create fun? Everyone gets a foundation in those skills, although they quickly start to realize where they want to specialize and what they want to develop into.
The industry is like really going up there, so I was thinking maybe I could join it and possibly like join like a AAA company like Riot or like Naughty Dog or something like that, and like maybe go behind the scenes and like work on level designs or even character designs, because like I like doing art on my free time a lot, so I think that would be like a cool thing to do in the future.
And then in the second half of their college career, they work on games in teams from the role that they've picked. And they take electives, specializing them further into those roles. So that by the time they're seniors in the college, they're working on a capstone project that could be a team of up to 10 people, all working on a single game.
In addition, they also gain access to industry knowledge and lucrative job and internship opportunities that support their path to success.
We have an industry council that's full of different companies in the city that are really important in games. You know, companies on the technology side like Microsoft, Unreal, and Unity, companies on the game side like Zynga, Epic, Avalanche, companies that organize other developers like advocacy groups or conference level organizers like Games for Change. And all of those groups are talking to us all the time about our curriculum, about how we're preparing students, about what student portfolios look like. And so we have meetings every 3 months with that group, and we conduct surveys with them to see what do they need. how should students be prepared? Like, what would a senior look like who's graduating from the program that you would be interested in hiring? And of course, how do we build mentorships and internships so that students in the program get access to work environments while they're in school?
And all this in turn changes the industry for the better by ensuring that more people are seen and represented in gaming.
Representations of people in color games are abysmal right now. And that's part of why this program exists, right? One of the reasons why we want to specifically target students in Harlem and Northern Manhattan and the South Bronx in gaming pathways is because these are people who play games in enormous numbers and are very smart about games, but people from those communities are not represented in the game industry. And our belief is that those toxic cultures of games can change. And also we will get whole new kinds of stories and whole new kinds of games if we simply invite those people to the table. And we do that by giving them a world-class game education that's accessible to them both geographically and financially. I think the way that we change these kinds of toxic cultures is by empowering the people who can change them with all the skills they need and with the critical awareness they need to recognize these problems and transform them as they enter the industry. And I want City College to be a place where those conversations can happen.
For Urban U, I'm Hannah Kavanagh.
Still up on Urban U, our CUNY Authors series introduces you to an award-winning book about gentrification and food for thought with a Queens College professor and nutrition expert who talks to us about fermented foods, including their fascinating history. Stay tuned.
The Honorable Aisha Bravo recently became the Bronx County Clerk. Raised by her grandmother in public housing, she's the first woman and the first Latina to hold the job. She works with the civil and criminal courts in the Bronx, and a huge task is bringing in enough people for all the juries.
One of the biggest roles for me would be destigmatizing the perception of serving on the jury. And I think having someone who looks like the population here in the Bronx matters.
She also works with her staff, including Administrator Teresa Torres, to help people with passports, notaries, citizenship, and documents that come out of the courts like divorces and guardianships.
I checked, and it does appear on the transcript, but I cannot yet give her access to this
Because she
case.
doesn't have the court order
She
yet.
doesn't have a court order.
Because of the word clerk, some people might not realize that the Bronx County Clerk is a huge job in both stature and responsibility. It's a lifetime appointment, and Aisha's work has an impact on thousands of people.
Her grandmother moved to New York from Puerto Rico in the 70s and was vigilant as she raised Aisha in public housing.
My grandma, she has been always very protective since I was a little girl. She wanted to make sure that I led through the good path.
What is your grandma like?
Mi abuela es una persona bien que tiene mucha energía, pelea, es luchadora. Vino aquí de Puerto Rico a ayudar a nuestra familia a tener una educación, tener un porvenir bueno. Es una persona que nunca se da por vencida.
You're a lot like her.
I think so. You know, it's funny, you don't realize that until you get older. And you're like, don't do that as you're growing up. And then you realize, you're a fighter and I got that from you.
With money short, Aisha left high school early.
There was a necessity, and I had to choose between my education and putting food on the table, which is something no child should be faced with, but we did.
She worked in a clothing store and got a GED. She wanted to go to CUNY's Hostos Community College, but the first day with crowds of students and lots of difficult forms felt impossible. So she started to leave, and that's when career counselor Graciano Matos stepped up.
She literally did walk out of the room, and I noticed her. I said, hey, wait, what's going on?
He's like, no, sit down, I'm gonna work with you. And had he not done that and taken out the time to just follow up with me, check in with me, and make sure that I was on track, I wouldn't be here today, because it all started that day.
Graciano is now a senior success coach at Hostos and a true friend, someone she confides in.
I found the power of my voice. That's what I found at Hostos.
She sure did. She was president of the student government. She finished at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She worked for U.S. Congressman Jose Serrano and then for his son, State Senator Serrano. She ran for office twice. She had executive roles in the Bronx Democratic Party and Community Board 7. Aisha is a single mom of 2 sons, Manny in high school and Zachariah in elementary school. And she still takes care of her grandma.
Now that she is the Bronx County Clerk, this is a huge job. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I'm just amazed. I'm so ecstatic for her. I'm so proud of her. I think that she's just gonna set a great example, being the first Latina Bronx County Clerk.
Is it important to you that you're the first woman and the first Latina to hold this job?
I think it's important that we push doors wide open, that I think that people in this borough need to see themselves reflected in certain positions of power. Those closest to the pain have to be closest to the power. This is why I think that having representation that looks like you matters.
I'm Donna Hanover for Urban U.
I think since the age of 8, my creative output was in the form of hip-hop verses. And I was always writing raps, always doing hip-hop. But all the while I was doing that, I always asked myself, what else would I do creatively if there was no such thing as hip-hop? And it always came back to storytelling.
Recently, those storytelling skills won Sadiq Fofana the prestigious Whiting Award for his book of short stories called Stories from the Tenants Downstairs. Fofana, who received his master's in education at City College, works hard to find the balance between writing and his 2 day jobs, teaching in CUNY's College Now program at City Tech and teaching high school English in Brooklyn.
My book is a collection of short stories that takes place in Harlem, New York, in a fictional apartment building called Banneker Terrace. And it features 8 residents, and each story is a story told from the residents' perspective. So it's 8 different tenants, 8 different stories. And as these tenants are telling their stories, about their personal struggles, there's also the looming horizon of gentrification and rent battles and things that are going on with the neighborhood, and it's changing.
This is Mimi, and I live in apartment 14D. Reading from my story, The Rent Manual. The slip is gonna come in the mail like you do every month, and it's gonna say balance.
Do you have a favorite character from the book?
When I think about, Naji and other students who are in the stories from the Tenants Downstairs, my heart's with them because they're based on a lot of people who've come through my classroom over the years. Every student is a character, and you learn quickly as a teacher that you deal with each student in a different way. And doing that has really, really informed my fiction. And it also, teaching has shown me that there are so many stories out there.
Do you think teaching has made you a better writer?
Oh, of course. It just gives me a sense of just groundedness. Brilliance and genius is everywhere. That's where I want to be. And not too many writers are public school teachers. And so in my most selfish moments, I'm like, oh my God, I have this all to myself. I can't believe I have all these stories to myself.
What do you hope people walk away with from this book?
I want people to just open it up and see 8 different people who are very, very distinct from each other, but then also share this communal bond. I love the idea of both types of reading experiences, like the experience of someone who could look at a character and say, that reminds me of someone I know, or a little bit of myself. And then I also love the idea of someone who's reading it and saying, you know what, I've never been to Harlem, New York, but somehow I can connect with the tale that this one resident is saying. I think that's the power of fiction, to just remind us that, like, you know, we live in different parts of the world, we live in different parts of the city, but at the end of the day, there are some things inside, there are some universal themes that, like, connect us, whether we like it or not.
Do you have your students read your book?
You know, I'm gonna dedicate my time to helping young people and helping them pass tests and get into college and whatnot. And so the moment that that spotlight comes on me, as much as it feels good, the idea of it feels good, of my my students being proud of me and saying congratulations to me, you know, I'd much rather be the person to read their writing, to read their essay and say, you know what, good job. You know, that makes me feel a little better. So for me, just having the experience of being in the classroom, being with the sons and daughters of just everyday New York City people, it grounds me and it humbles me in a way that, like, I can't walk away from that. So I would probably say I would never be a full-time writer, even if I had the choice. But, you know, maybe things would change if I ever had that choice. But it seems like a romantic thing to say right now that I'm going to stick to.
I'm Scott Kirby for Urban U.
They're good for gut health, may prevent heart disease, bolster immunity, and aid in digestion. But most importantly, fermented foods are delicious.
From kimchi to kombucha, fermented foods are all the rage, rising in popularity by 150% according to recent restaurant data. But some may be surprised to learn that the superfoods, which have superior nutritional value and beneficial bacteria, are essentially decomposing delicacies.
Fermentation is a controlled decay, the natural process through which the microorganisms like bacteria, yeast, converts carbohydrate, such as starch and sugar, into alcohol or acid.
A complex process familiar to Dr. Sungeun Choi, an associate professor in the Department of Family Nutrition and Exercise Sciences at Queens College, who teaches fermentation in her experimental foods class.
Fermented food have been associated with several health benefits, including promoted digestive health and stronger immunity, and may help the balance of helpful bacteria by fighting off the harmful bacteria. So that's why it's especially good for you after you've taken antibiotics.
That helpful bacteria is commonly known as probiotics, which may reduce the risk of heart disease.
Fermented food may lower the several key factors in heart disease, such as obesity and high blood pressure. And also, the fermented food may help lower the risk of diabetes.
The many health benefits of fermented foods may contribute to their current popularity. However, historians have traced fermentation of foods and beverages as far back as 10,000 BC and found the primary purpose of the process was practical.
Humans started to ferment for preservation.
To essentially keep food year-round from rotting in extreme temperatures. Scientists believe fermentation of food first occurred by accident in northern Africa, where searing temperatures spontaneously fermented milk, creating yogurt. However, intentional fermentation of food is thought to have started in Asia.
Scientists have long believed that the fermentation as a means of preserving food is originated in China.
With the prevalence of Asian fermented foods, the perception may be that fermentation is more popular in Asia. But Professor Choi says all cultures across the world have their own types of fermented foods.
All humans, whether Asians or not, they like to produce fermented food. Nomadic society have a different type of dairy fermented foods, such as cheese, yogurt, but the agricultural society have fermented pickled vegetables.
Today, the distinctive flavor makes many fermented foods addictive in taste, and the varied health benefits make them a smart nutritional choice. However, Professor Choi says all fermented food is not created equal.
Some fermented food have high levels of added sugar and salt and fat.
Which is why it's very important to read labels and consume fermented foods in moderation.
I would recommend 2 to 3 servings of fermented food per day. But the one serving size was defined as 3/4 cup of yogurt or kombucha and 1/4 cup of pickled vegetables, the fermented vegetables such as kimchi or sauerkraut.
For those people who want to make fermented foods, how is it a very involved process and is it safe?
So if you want to make a fermented food at home, you should control the good bacteria. So in case it's a pathogen, it can cause some disease. So that's why when you make a fermented food at home, you should follow the safety guidelines and you should find the standardized the process.
And then enjoy. For Urban U, I'm Sungeun.
And that's a wrap. For more episode highlights and sneak peeks into our upcoming stories, meet us on our social media platforms. Thank you for watching these stories from the largest university in the nation, the City University of New York.